For you some of the major tools that you're going to be using over on the left-hand toolbar of Photoshop, as well as to mention to you that for any of the tools, if you forget what it's for or what it's called, if you hover over, if you leave your cursor over that tool, you're going to get the tool tips, and that's going to show you a little demo of what that tool does, which is super handy, as well as telling you what it is. And I also want to remind you that any of these tools that have a little triangle down the bottom, most of them do, but not all of them, if you click and hold, you're going to see that there are multiple tools underneath it. Now, some of these have tools we're more likely to use under it than others, and I'll always tell you if you need to press down and hold to get a tool. The tool that you're going to automatically be put into is the Move tool. And this tool, again, like many of the tools, there are some things that you can change up at the top that allows you to like customize the tool. So for me, I tend to use the Show Transform controls, that particular toggle box, show, hide, check mark, a lot. So that way I want to sometimes be able to do my transform controls directly in my layer rather than going up to edit and to transform. So this is going to be what you kind of go back to when you're done using the other tools so that you can move your layer where you want it. Now the Marquee tool here, that's rectangular marquee, again, this is going to be one of the top ones you use, and you can click and drag to make a selection box. And then when you make that selection box, you can copy, paste, or you can work on whatever's inside your selection. And again, if you click and hold, you can do a circle or you can stick with your square. Now, the other thing for this particular tool to remember is that up at the top here, you can either have it so that when you click to make a new selection, it just makes another selection box, and if you click off, it deselects. Or if you're going to be doing something where you then want to add to that selection, you can change it to this guy here, add selection, and then when I click and drag, I get a new box, and both of them are there. Or you can go ahead and you can subtract from that selection if, say, you've made it a little bit too big, you want to get a little bit closer in to the item that you want to be working on. You can go ahead and subtract from your selection, and then of course there is the like overlap, so only the things that are overlapped between the two are left. But normally you're just going to be in this, so when you click and you drag, that's the selection that you make. If you want to make a selection that, like in the example of my radish here, I don't want to grab this part of the corn, you can use the lasso tool to click and you can make a little polygon around the part that you want to select. Now, again, if you click and hold down, you can get the regular lasso tool, which allows you to kind of like draw freehand around the thing that you want. And again, there's a magnetic one which kind of jumps to. I tend to like the polygon, but again, it's up to you, whatever you find works best for you. Next down, the magic wand tool. This can be useful if you've got something where like there's a really strong shape, like my little pumpkin here. It's gonna go and use the color to figure out where the edges are of that shape. And you can see it doesn't work quite as well if I want to pick this white in between. So things that are very obvious in their outlines tend to work better for the magic wand tool. And again, there's a quick selection tool as well, which works pretty well. Your crop tool allows you to crop your image in. Not going to be using this one too much in our projects, but you might if you're working with some photography. Frame tool, again, I don't tend to use that so much, but again, it creates a placeholder frame. You might use the eyedropper tool though, especially if you want to have your text, say, match the color of your objects. With the eyedropper tool, you can go ahead and you can grab the color of your object here, and that's going to make it the foreground color that is being used for whatever you happen to be doing next. And so that's down here. You've got your foreground and your background. You can see if I click the foreground color, it's showing me here that it's this dark green. That's great. That's really handy. If you are working on a photograph, the spot healing brush can be useful, as can the clone stamp tool. We're not going to be using them too much, but they can be things that come in handy. Brush tool, again, that can be useful if you're wanting to touch something up. Same with the eraser tool down here. In both cases, you can go ahead and at the top here, you can set the size and the hardness of your brush. The eraser tool is basically the paintbrush, but it's set to take things away instead of putting things down. And again, with the paintbrush, it's always going to use the foreground color that you have set, in the same way that if I go to set some text right now, it's going to use the foreground color that I have. So those are quite handy. This is your eraser down here. And again, if you forget that this is the paintbrush, just put your cursor over it and, oh yeah, the brush tool, that's what I want. I don't want the history brush. That's something different. Paint bucket, as you may have heard me complain about when we were in Illustrator, by default, it's going to show you the gradient tool, which is a handy tool, but the paint bucket to me is far more handy. So you click and hold down on the gradient tool, you'll get the paint bucket tool. Smudge tool and the dodge tool are also ones you might use if you're touching up some photographs. We're going to use them a bit less. Again, if you forget, underneath the dodge, you also have burn. Both of these come from when you were manually exposing negatives and film from photography. But if you forget which one's dodge and which one's burn, I often do. I knew how to do them when I had film and I was working in a dark room, but I would always forget which one's which. Again, if you just hold your cursor over it, it'll show you that dodge allows you to lighten and burn was going to darken. Pen tool is not really for drawing so much as it is to create vectors. So usually, we're not going to use this so much in Photoshop because we would use Illustrator for making vectors, but it shows you how Photoshop can kind of let you do a little bit of playing back and forth with both. The type tool, however, we are going to use in order to set our text a little bit later on in the project. And again, we've got our hand tool, which allows us to pan around, and our zoom tool, which allows us to look in. And so remember, if you forget what any of these are, hold your cursor over and it will show you a little demo.